Terms 2.2. What is communication apprehension? I have to do what? On the first day of history class, you see the syllabus and see that a significant percentage of your overall grade in the course will be determined by a 10-minute oral presentation that each student must give in front of the class. The presentation, due in 8 weeks, will be based on an original research project. After a very positive job interview, you receive an email asking you to return for a second interview, prepared to answer several questions in front of a panel of senior managers. The questions are contained in an attachment. Please be ready to stand in the front of the room to answer. The email reads, "See you next week. You will be having dinner Saturday to meet your fiancé's family." Then, just days from the dinner, your fiancée tells you that her father, a former Marine and retired police officer, will want to talk about politics and current events, and will likely judge what sort of person you are based on how well you defend your ideas. Each of these scenarios might provoke one of the most common fears in our society: public speaking anxiety or glossophobia. PSA is a situation-specific social anxiety arising from the real or anticipated enactment of an oral presentation. If you experience PSA, you are not alone. Approximately a quarter of all people report having this fear. However, overcoming PSA is important if you are to grow personally and professionally. PSA can prevent you from taking risks to share your ideas, to speak about your work, and to present your solutions to problems that affect many people. Even mild PSA can affect your self-esteem, how you are perceived by others, as well as success in school and in landing job interviews. Effective public speaking is not simply about learning what to say, but about developing the confidence to say it. Fear of public speaking is not so much related to quality of speech as it is to how the speaker feels, thinks, or acts when faced with speaking in public. The most effective way to deal with PSA is to identify your own brand of this fear, then take specific steps to overcome this apprehension. 2.3. Classifying PSA forms of PSA. The causes of PSA, public speaking anxiety, vary from person to person and are rooted in unique life experiences. Following are several contributing factors to public speaking anxiety. Trait anxiety PSA can be aligned with an individual's personality. For example, people who would describe themselves as shy often seek to avoid interaction with others because they are uncertain of how they will be perceived. Because avoiding such judgment is generally not difficult, this avoidance becomes a pattern of behavior. As a result, those with trait anxiety are likely to view any chance to express themselves publicly with skepticism and hesitation. State anxiety PSA can also be derived from the external situation in which individuals find themselves, or state anxiety. While people with trait anxiety are predisposed to fear how others might perceive them, state anxiety is a result of a previous adverse situation. Those with state anxiety might have had a negative experience in public at an early age, such as forgetting a line in a play, losing a spelling bee, or doing poorly when called on in class, resulting in public embarrassment. These experiences often lead to the formation of state anxiety. Scrutiny fear. Other researchers describe PSA as deriving from a fear of scrutiny. This anxiety is simply the fear of being in a situation where one is being watched or observed. Those who struggle with PSA will recognize varying intensities associated with different situations or triggers. Therefore, overcoming PSA requires first that you recognize and then minimize your own personal cause of this fear. Both state anxiety and scrutiny fear can be effectively addressed through cognitive restructuring and thoughtful, deliberate experience. Cognitive restructuring, the major difference between presenting to a public audience versus presenting to a small group of close friends, involves one's attitude about the situation. Overcoming PSA is as much a matter of changing one's attitude as it is developing one's skills as a speaker. A change in attitude can be fostered through a self-reflective regimen called cognitive restructuring, which is an internal process through which individuals deliberately adjust their perceptions of an action or experience. Cognitive restructuring is a 3-step internal process. 1. Identify objectively what you think. 2. Identify any inconsistencies between perception and reality. 3. Replace destructive thinking with supportive thinking. These steps are easy to understand, but perhaps difficult to execute. The first step is to objectively identify what you're thinking about as you approach a public speaking opportunity. Recall your habitual frame of reference. Shine a bright light directly on it. This results will be different for each student, as this is an internal process based on unique individual experiences. Sources of apprehension. Two common concerns described by those with PSA are the fear of being under scrutiny, as if you're under some collective microscope with everybody's eyes on you, and the fear that the audience is just waiting for you to slip up, so they can immediately render an embarrassing judgment. How might CR be applied to each of these widely held perceptions? Center of attention. When people describe the specific scrutiny fear, they use phrases like, everyone just stares at me, or I don't like having all eyes on me. Consider for a moment what your experiences have been like when you have been a member of the audience listening to someone else speak. Where did you look while the person spoke? Did you look at the speaker? Direct eye contact means different things in different cultures. But in the United States, eye contact is the primary means for an audience to demonstrate to the speaker that they are listening. Nobody likes to be ignored, and most members of an audience would not want to be perceived as ignoring the speaker. That would be rude. So the audience is looking at the speaker as a sign of respect. Compare. Before SAR, the frame of reference reflects the idea that everyone is staring at me. After SAR, the perception is altered to the audience is looking at me to be supportive and polite. After all, I'm the one doing the talking. Fear of judgment. Another common concern is the fear of being judged harshly or making an embarrassing mistake. Go back to that memory of you as an audience member, but this time reflect on what sort of expectations you had at the time. Did you expect the speaker to be flawless and riveting? Did you have in mind some super high level performance, below which the speaker would have disappointed you? You probably did not. Think back to any experiences you may have had watching another speaker struggle, perhaps a classmate during one of their presentations. Witnessing something like that can be uncomfortable. Did you feel empathy for the person struggling? Isn't it a much more pleasant experience when the speaker does well? Again, the vast majority of people empathize with the speaker when it comes to the quality of the presentation. They are willing to give the speaker a chance to say what they want to say. 2. If the speaker stumbles over her words or misspeaks, she notices a flaw much more than the audience does because they do not expect a flawless performance. They know the difference between a live presentation and a carefully edited performance. Think about when you have watched professionals speak live in front of a camera to deliver the news or provide commentary about a sporting or political event. When these professionals occasionally stumble over their words or mispronounce something, how upset does the audience become? Can you even remember the specific misstep made by one of these professionals? More than likely you can't, because when that person flubbed his lines, your brain just processed it as normal human speech. So even if you misspeak a word or even forget a line, your experience will be more frustrating and memorable for you than it will be for your audience. Thus, before CR, the frame of reference reflects the idea that everyone is judging me harshly. And after CR, the perception is altered to the audience is willing to listen to what I have to say because it's a more pleasant experience for them if the speaker is successful. Consider what comes into your mind if you are to deliver a public presentation. Are your thoughts consumed with many uncertainties? What if I make a mistake? What if they don't like what I'm talking about? What if? Try your own version of CR. Put yourself in the role of audience member and ask yourself whether your fears as a speaker are consistent with your expectations as an audience member. Remember that, just like you, the audience wants the speaker to succeed. Of course, CR is always easier said than done. It is a process that takes time, patience, and practice. The most important thing to remember is that you are trying CR as a means of breaking a habit, and habits are formed over periods of time, never instantaneously. Breaking a habit can only be accomplished gradually and with deliberate effort. Changing your attitude is only one element in overcoming PSA. The other involves improving your skills as a speaker, including diligently preparing for your presentation. 2.4. Learning confidence techniques for building confidence. A speaker's nervousness is linked to her level of preparation. The best, most consistent, and direct way to minimize the level of nervousness you feel is through effective preparation. This is always true. More practice results in less nervousness. Michael Jordan was once asked the best way to learn how to shoot free throws. To everyone's surprise, the first step he described did not entail shooting the ball. Instead, he described how the first step in learning to shoot free throws is to run sprints. Run until your body was under the same stress as it would be in a game when you needed to make those free throws. because your practice would only be truly productive when performed under those conditions. Only then do you pick up the ball and shoot. All types of preparation and practice yield benefits, but there is a significant difference between merely helpful practice and sufficient practice, or know what you're talking about, and knowing what you're going to say. While thinking about your presentation can be helpful, that sort of preparation will not give you a sense of what you are actually going to say. Athletes know that the best practices will recreate game conditions and test their abilities to perform in real-life scenarios. Sufficient practice for public speaking recreates those real-life scenarios. Many students do not practice effectively before speaking in public, causing them to believe that practice isn't helpful. Unfortunately, these same students usually have had little, if any, training in how to prepare for a presentation, and so they employ the scholastic training they are most familiar with, how to write a paper. However, this is not the same activity as giving an oral presentation. Their lack of proper preparation only contributes to their lack of confidence. Let's look at a few elements of effective practice. Visualize success. Athletes and performers are often coached to visualize what they are trying to do as a way of performing correctly. Football and basketball players must envision how each member of the team will move during a particular play, because team success depends on speedy and flawless coordination among individuals. Dancers, bodybuilders, and people practicing yoga are trained to visualize the form and positioning of their bodies as they execute their moves. Engaging the imagination in this way can improve performance. Speakers, too, should visualize success. As you practice, visualize yourself presenting with confidence to a receptive audience. See your relaxed facial expressions and hear your confident tone of voice. Imagine yourself moving gracefully, complementing what you say with expressive gestures. Imagine the audience reacting appropriately, nodding appreciatively, and giving thoughtful consideration to your points. Imagine the gratification of watching the audience really get it. When you can honestly envision yourself performing at this level, you are taking an important step toward achieving that goal. Avoid gimmicks. Some acting coaches encourage their students to practice in front of mirrors so that they can watch themselves perform and evaluate how they move. In acting, this can be very useful, but in speaking, it is less so. When you practice your presentation, the most important element is expressiveness. You want to become more familiar with how much material you have to present, the order in which you plan to present it, and the phrasing you think would be most effective to express it. Watching yourself perform in a mirror will focus your attention on your appearance first, and on what you express second. This makes using a mirror during practice a distraction from what the practice ought to achieve. For some reason, the myth persists that imagining your audience in their underwear is an effective way to make standing in front of them seem less frightening. These sorts of gimmicks don't work. In fact, concentrating on anything other than what you're doing is distracting and not beneficial at all. Do your best to avoid such advice. Visualize success. Breathe and release here. We will discuss a shortened version of the breathe and release technique. This relaxation technique could be useful for nervous speakers, especially those who are concerned with the physiological manifestations of nervousness, such as shaky hands or knees. The key to breathe and release is to understand that when nervous tension results in minor trembling, the effort to try and keep one's hands from shaking contributes to the whole situation. That is, trying to stop literally makes the problem worse. Therefore, the best approach is through relaxation. How to breathe and release. 1. Imagine the nervousness within your body. 2. Imagine the energy bubbling inside you, like boiling water. 3. Draw that energy to a high point within your body through a deep, cleansing breath. 4. Imagine this cleansing breath like a vacuum, inhaling all the bubbling liquid. 5. Release the energy by deliberately relaxing your upper body, all the way from your fingertips to your shoulder blades. 6. Imagine how keeping any part of your upper extremities tense would result in a kink in the release valve, and so complete relaxation is the key to success. Minimize what you memorize. Another important hint for speech preparation is to avoid writing an entirely scripted version of the presentation. A speech outline is not a monologue or manuscript. It is a guideline and should be used as a roadmap for your speech. Remember that lunch with your friends? When you were describing the movie plot, you were being conversant in a prepared way. This means that you knew what you were describing, but you were not concerned with the specific words you were using. Being conversant is a condition of being prepared to discuss an issue intelligently. A well-prepared speaker is conversant regarding her topic. Consider how being conversant in this manner allows for freer, more fluid communication, with no stress associated with your ability to remember the exact words you wanted to use. Being conversant also gives the speaker the best chance to recognize and react to audience feedback. If you are completely focused on the integrity of scripted comments, then you'll be unable to read and react to your audience in any meaningful way. Imagine how frustrating it would be for your friends at that lunch if you would not respond to any of their questions until you were finished reading a few descriptive paragraphs about the movie. They would probably just wait until you were done reading and then try to engage you in a conversation. Practice out loud. Remember the very first time you tried to do anything, a game, a sport, an activity, anything at all. How good were you out of the gate? Perhaps you had talent or were gifted with a feel for what you were doing. But even then, didn't you get better with more experience? Nobody does anything the very best on their very first attempt. And everyone, even the most talented among us, benefit from effective practice. In this way, speaking in public is no different from any other activity. To maximize the chance that your presentation will come out smooth and polished, you will need to hear it all the way through. By practicing out loud, from the beginning to the ending, you will be able to listen to your whole speech and properly gauge the flow of your entire presentation. Additionally, without at least one complete out loud practice, there will be no way to accurately estimate the length of your speech, and your preparation will remain insufficient. The out loud dress rehearsal is the single most important element to your preparation. Without it, you will be delivering your presentation in full for the first time when it counts the most. Putting yourself at that sort of disadvantage isn't wise and is easily avoided. You might even consider trying that initial practice without the benefit of any notes. Stand up, start speaking, see what comes out. During your initial practice, consider these questions. Where, during your presentation, are you most and least conversant? Where, during your presentation, are you most in need of supportive notes? What do your notes need to contain? Prepare for your public presentation by speaking and listening to yourself, rather than by writing, editing, and rewriting. Remember that when you are having a conversation, you never use the same sort of language and syntax as you do when you are writing a formal paper. Practice with the goal of becoming conversant in your topic, not fluent with a script. Customize your practice depending on your personal level of PSA. You may choose to implement techniques previously mentioned in different ways. Take a moment to reflect on what triggers your PSA. Do you dislike the feeling of being the center of attention? Are you more concerned with who is in the audience and what they might think of you? Or are you worried about freezing in front of the audience and forgetting what you wanted to say? Write some of these concerns down and put them into a priority order. If you're worried about a particular issue or problem, how might you prepare to minimize the chance of that issue arising? Now, consider your current method of preparation. Do you prepare more for a written paper than for an oral presentation? Do you have the goal of presenting a scripted message? Do you practice out loud? During your process, do you practice aloud? Do you practice at all before you begin to compose your speaking notes? Or do you only practice after? Remember that dealing with PSA often requires breaking a mental habit. It is a good idea to change what you have done previously. Be deliberate. Observe what works for your situation. As stated earlier, everyone deals with PSA most effectively through increased self-awareness and a willingness to complete each of the steps in the entire process. After you acknowledge your reality, then take the steps necessary to overcome apprehension. After reading about